Indigenous Rights Radio, because knowledge is power.
You are now listening to Cultural Survival's Global News Bulletin. Every month, Cultural Survival brings you the latest news impacting indigenous peoples across the globe. This July edition features important stories from Europe, North, Central, South America, Africa, Asia, and beyond. Starting news from North America. News from USA. A new White House report accuses the Smithsonian institutions of promoting a radical activist ideology. The 162 pages report says exhibits at the Museum of American History and the National Museum of the American Indian focus too much on genocide and stolen land, while overlooking the nation's broader heritage. The review comes from a 2025 executive order by President Trump. Native American advocates have strongly criticized the report. Shannon O. Longlin, head of the Association on American Indian Affairs, called it government-sponsored erasure and said leaving Native nations out does not mean the American history more patriotic. The White House did not offer guidance on changing the exhibits. Moving to Canada, more than 100 demonstrators marched through Niagara Falls demanding accountability after local officials compared Indigenous evacuees to people experiencing homelessness. The protest led Mayor Jim Diodati to City Hall, where he apologized directly to members of Kashechewan First Nation. About 1,100 residents have been staying in local hotels since January, after a Suez crisis forced them to leave their northern community. City officials had earlier said evacuees were straining emergency services and harming Niagara Falls tourism image. Although Chief Hosea Wesley accepted the apology, rally organizers are still calling for the mayor's resignation, calling the remarks racists. In Australia's Indigenous Children's Commissioner has warned that Queensland's push to increase adoptions could seriously harm First Nations children and young people. Commissioner Sue Anne Hunter said plan, sparked by a child safety inquiry, is a backward step that echoes the trauma of stolen generations. First Nations children make up nearly half of all children in state care in Queensland. Premier David Crissa fully supports the move, saying current adoptions rates are too low. But support groups say permanent legal removal can cause lasting trauma and breaks children's ties to their culture, identity, and community. They want the government to focus instead on early intervention and kinship care. Moving to Africa, in Kenya, Maasai and Brindile communities are pushing back against a large carbon credit project. The Northern Rangelands Trust is seeking to start the project, which has been suspended twice and sells carbon credits to companies including Meta and Netflix. Local herders say the organization is using coercion, intimidation, and misinformation to pressure residents into signing new land agreements. Activists argue the deal would weaken indigenous grazing rights and local control over land. Community members warn that signing without understanding the papers could amount to giving away ancestral land. Moving to Nigeria, severe floods are affecting communities across West Africa, with rural and indigenous people hit the hardest. Dozens have died, and families in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana are seeing ancestral lands washed away. In Nigeria, indigenous farmers and herders are trapped in a cycle of heavy rains that destroy crops, followed by dry spells that leave little behind. Many communities cannot afford flood barriers, and government support is limited. With more rains expected, they remain highly vulnerable. Now moving to Asia, starting news from Nepal. Indigenous Newar farmers from Kokana and Bungmati staged a protest on June 29, a national payday day, demanding that the Nepali army be removed from their ancestral land. Instead of planting rice, they held a demonstration against the Kathmandu-Tarai fast-track project, saying it threatens their heritage and religious roots. Residents say the military has occupied their traditional land without their free, prior, and informed consent, in violation of international treaties protecting indigenous peoples' rights, including ILO Convention No. 169 and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which Nepal has ratified. The multi-billion rupee project has been delayed by unresolved land compensation issues. As the resistance grows, the government is considering shifting the project's starting point to avoid the dispute. Several legal challenges are still pending in the Supreme Court. In Indonesia, residents and activists in Indonesia's Veda Way are stepping up opposition to the expansion of nickel mining. On Anti-Mining Day, the demonstrators blocked key industrial routes and called for an immediate halt to operations fueled by the global electric vehicle boom. Protesters say the push for green energy is turning central Halmahera into a sacrifice zone. They cite deforestation, toxic water pollution, and growing threats to the indigenous Ohangana Meniawa people. Activist Rifia Rusti said, "There is nothing green about an industry built on environmental destruction," adding that local communities refuse to sacrifice their livelihoods for global supply chains. Now news from Latin and South Americas. Starting from Peru. Indigenous leaders from 5 South American countries are joining forces to respond to rising violence. Meeting in Lima, representatives from Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, Brazil, and Chile agreed to create a regional support network. The alliance comes as environmental defenders face increasing murders, forced displacement, and criminalization for protecting ancestral lands from extractive industries. Although the legal systems differ from country to country, organizers say the threats are the same. The new network will help activists share survival strategies and protection methods across borders. As defenders say, protecting the Amazon and ancestral territories has become a deadly struggle, but they will no longer face it alone. Now in Brazil, indigenous knowledge is helping fight wildfires in Brazil. In Tocantins, the Charante people use controlled burns to protect their territory before the peak dry season. After years of discrimination, Charante leaders now work directly with Instituto Brasileño del Medio Ambiente y de los Recursos Naturales Renovables, the Brazil's environmental agency. Together they form a joint brigade that uses ancestral techniques to clear dry brush safely. Officials say the partnership shows how indigenous knowledge can help protect ecosystems and respond to the climate change. In Bolivia marked Indigenous New Year 5534 amid political turmoil. Despite a state of emergency and roadblocks demanding President Rodrigo Paz's resignation, communities gathered at nearly 70 sacred sites across the country. Ceremonies for the Andean, Amazonian, and Taco New Year were scaled back because of national security restrictions. Still, indigenous leaders said the celebrations remained an important act of cultural resistance. In Andean philosophy, the New Year represents transformations and renewal, making the subdued rituals as symbols of resilience during a deep institutional crisis. In Ecuador, The Awa people's ancestral territory in Ecuador has been added to the United Nations Environmental Programme's ICCA Global Registry, which is a global database that documents lands and waters conserved by indigenous peoples and local communities, marking a significant recognition of their conservation efforts. Indigenous leaders called the designations a major win for community governance and biodiversity protection. The registry highlights indigenous communities that safeguard ecosystems through ancestral knowledge, and listing underscores the Awa people's role as stewards of the rainforests. Moving to Argentina. Argentina's northern Salta province has passed a landmark law addressing systematic sexual abuse of indigenous girls and women. Known as the Octorina Law, it officially recognizes the centuries-old practice of assaults by non-indigenous men, locally called chinillo, as a hate crime. Named after the late Winchi activist Octorina Zamora, the law follows decades of advocacy by indigenous women. It also requires mandatory educational programs and public awareness campaigns to confront this entrenched violence. Human rights advocates say the measures is an important first step toward justice and safety for vulnerable communities. That is all for this edition of Cultural Survival's Global News Bulletin. Stay tuned for our next broadcast. For more information on the rights of indigenous peoples, visit cs.org and follow Cultural Survival on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Threads, and Blue Sky. If you found this program valuable, subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave us a 5-star review on Spotify. You can also follow us on TikTok at Radio Derecho Indigenous.